Welcome to Time Stream, where we travel through history to uncover the moments that shaped the world we know today. In this episode, we journey back over 2,000 years to witness a bold and ambitious campaign, Julius Caesar's invasion of Britain. In 55 and 54 BC, during the height of Roman power, Caesar crossed the English Channel with his legions in an attempt to conquer a mysterious and unconquered land. For the Romans, Britain was a place of legend, wealth, and political opportunity. For the native Celtic tribes, it was home, and they were prepared to defend it. But what really happened during Caesar's expeditions? Were they military triumphs or political theatre? And how did these first Roman contacts shape the future of Britain? In this program, we'll examine Caesar's own writings, explore archaeological evidence, and retrace the paths of the Roman legions as they met fierce resistance on foreign shores. Join us as we uncover the ambition, strategy, and legacy behind Rome's first encounter with Britain. This is Time Stream, and our journey into Caesar's Britain begins now.
The invasions of Britain by Julius Caesar in 55 and 54 BC marked the first direct contact between the Roman world and the island of Britain. Though these expeditions were brief and did not result in lasting conquest, they were significant both symbolically and strategically. They laid the groundwork for future Roman ambitions and introduced Britain to the broader political sphere of the Roman Republic. By the mid-1st century, Rome had already established dominance over much of Western Europe. Gaul, modern France, was in the process of being conquered by Caesar during his famous Gallic Wars. As governor of Roman Gaul, Caesar was pushing the boundaries of Roman influence further northwest. Britain, just across the English Channel, remained a mysterious and unconquered land, known only through Greek and Roman geographical writings and traders' tales. Caesar's motivations for invading Britain were both political and military. At home in Rome, he faced growing political rivalry and needed fresh victories to maintain his popularity and power. Conquering or even just invading the enigmatic island of Britain would bring prestige, glory, and attention to his name. Moreover, Caesar claimed that some British tribes had been supporting his Gallic enemies, especially the Veneti and other rebellious coastal tribes. A punitive expedition would also serve as a warning.
Although Caesar's first expedition dates back to 55 BCE, he originally planned to invade Britain a year earlier, back in 56 BCE. But before he could do this, Caesar had to suppress the Veneti uprising in northern Gaul. He also had to take control of the English Channel so he could safely put his army onto ships and cross to Britain. However, the shipping routes across the English Channel were dominated by the Veneti, who possessed a very powerful merchant fleet. He did this after suppressing the Veneti by killing their leaders and sending the rest of them into slavery. Remember, the Roman Empire was not established by holding meetings and taking minutes, it was established by killing anybody who got in their way. Caesar now needed a port of departure to assemble his invasion fleet and from where to sail. So at the end of 56 BCE, Caesar conquered the tribes of the Morinii and the Menapii, who controlled the English Channel in an area of the Pas de Calais. This was the shortest route to sail across to Britain. It was probably the Pontius Itius, where Boulogne stands now, in the territory of the Morinii, that Caesar set sail with 80 transport ships, 2 legions, and an unknown number of warships well after midnight on August the 23rd. Another 18 transports of cavalry sailed from a different port, intending to join up with Caesar and his invasion fleet.
In late summer of 55 BCE, Caesar launched his first crossing of the Channel. It was a relatively small expedition, with around 2 legions, roughly 10,000 soldiers, and it was more of a reconnaissance mission than a full-scale invasion. The crossing itself was difficult. The Romans were unfamiliar with the tides and weather of the channel, and several transport ships were damaged or scattered during the journey. Upon landing on the Kent coast, the Roman troops faced immediate resistance from British tribes, who used chariots and light infantry to harass the invaders. The beach landing was chaotic and dangerous. Caesar's forces eventually secured a foothold, but supply issues and worsening weather made it difficult to maintain the campaign. After a few skirmishes and failed negotiations, Caesar decided to withdraw. Although militarily indecisive, he presented the expedition as a success in his reports to the Senate. He claimed that several British tribes had sent envoys and promised tribute, an important political message, even if largely symbolic.
When Caesar reached the British port of Dubris, now called Dover, the British were waiting for him, with an army of chariots and cavalry. Landing on the beach would have exposed his troop to attack, so he continued sailing along the coast, with the British chariots and cavalry following. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the Roman ships were too low in the water to get close to the shore, and therefore the troops had to disembark in deep water, whilst under constant enemy attack. Initially, the troops didn't want to land, but according to Caesar, the soldiers changed their mind when they saw the example of an eagle-bearer of the 10th Legion who was first to jump into the water near the enemy coast and encouraged them with a speech. "Leap, fellow soldiers, unless you wish to betray your eagle to the enemy. I, for my part, will perform my duty to the Republic and to my general." The British were eventually driven back and the Romans were able to establish a beachhead, but were not able to pursue the Britons as the ships with the cavalry had not arrived due to adverse weather. The weather also played a part in ending the invasion. Storms destroyed many of Caesar's ships and he was taken by surprise at the English tide, which he had not seen in the Mediterranean. The storms drove the cavalry ships back to Gaul and destroyed more of Caesar's ships on the coast. With food running low and winter approaching, Caesar returned to Gaul to plan a new invasion the following year. Just as bad weather defeated Napoleon's invasion of Russia, so also bad weather defeated Caesar's first attempt to invade Britain.
Although Julius Caesar's invasions of Britain in 55 and 54 BC did not result in a permanent Roman occupation, they marked the beginning of a long and complex relationship between Britain and Rome. The expeditions were relatively brief and primarily exploratory, but their consequences echoed through Roman and British history for generations. Following Caesar's second expedition in 54 BC, several British tribal leaders submitted to Rome, offering tribute and pledging loyalty. However, these promises were fragile and largely symbolic. After Caesar's departure, Roman influence quickly diminished, and many of the local tribes returned to their independent ways. Still, Caesar achieved his primary political goals. Back in Rome, his military prestige increased significantly, and the invasions were widely celebrated. His accounts of Britain, published in his commentary I de Bello Gallico, fascinated Roman readers with vivid descriptions of a mysterious, foggy island beyond the known world, inhabited by fierce warriors, druids, and strange customs. Despite the lack of immediate control, Caesar's expeditions had opened Britain to Roman awareness. Trade between Britain and the Roman world expanded, especially through Gaul, modern France, which had become a Roman province. British exports included metals like tin, lead, and iron, as well as slaves, hunting dogs, and grain. Roman goods, such as pottery, jewelry, and wine, began appearing more frequently in southern Britain, especially among the elite. Some local kings and chieftains even sought Roman favor as a means to strengthen their own power over rival tribes.
almost to begin at the beginning. Julius Caesar came to Britannia because nobody else had before, or rather, no Roman had before. Roman imperialism, you could say, is driven by the desire of elite Romans for status. Whereas some empires are after resources, the Romans were largely after status, the importance that they could gain from being the first, or from expanding the empire. Julius Caesar came to Britannia twice. The first visit has been described as a reconnaissance in force. He came to have a look around, and he brought quite a lot of people with him to help him do it.
For nearly a century after Caesar's expeditions, Rome did not return militarily to Britain, as internal conflicts and other imperial priorities took precedence. However, Britain remained a place of strategic interest and potential expansion. During this period, many British rulers maintained diplomatic ties with Rome, and some sent hostages or gifts to emperors. The most famous example is King Cunobelinus, Shakespeare's Cymbeline, a powerful ruler of southeastern Britain who developed close relations with Rome in the early 1st century. It was not until 43 under Emperor Claudius, that Rome launched a full-scale invasion of Britain, leading to lasting occupation and Romanization. By then, Caesar's early expeditions served as a precedent and justification for imperial ambitions. Claudius, like Caesar before him, sought to boost his political standing by achieving a glorious military victory. The Roman conquest under Claudius resulted in the establishment of Roman provinces in Britain, construction of roads, forts, towns, and eventually Hadrian's Wall. Roman law, language, and culture began to mix with native British traditions. Although Julius Caesar's campaigns in Britain were brief and inconclusive, they symbolized Rome's first steps toward imperial expansion into the British Isles. They marked Britain's transition from mythic island to imperial frontier and paved the way for centuries of cultural exchange, resistance, and eventual transformation under Roman rule.
The second visit is more about going to the ends of the world and winning a battle. And that's really all he was interested in. If he hadn't been assassinated, I think he wouldn't have come back to Britain. I think he had his eyes on the East. And he had his eyes on the East because he had made a deal with two other men, Crassus and Pompey. He was the junior partner in that, what historians call the first triumvirate. Pompey was the great military commander, Pompeius Magnus. Crassus was the money man. Pompeius Magnus had made his name in the East. Crassus met his death in the East, and I suspect that Julius Caesar, if he hadn't been assassinated, was planning to go east as well. It was enough for Caesar to come to Britain and say, "I have been."
The crossing of the River Thames during Julius Caesar's second expedition to Britain stands as one of the most dramatic and strategically daring moments in his British campaign. It demonstrated not only Roman military discipline and engineering skill but also Caesar's personal audacity as a commander operating in unknown and hostile territory. The River Thames was a natural boundary between southern Britain and the tribal territories to the north and west. For the Cativolani, led by Cassivellaunus, it served as a last defensive line against the advancing Roman legions. The river itself was wide, tidal, and in many places marshy and difficult to navigate. At the time, there were no stone bridges, crossings were limited to narrow fords, often known only to locals. Cassivellaunus used this knowledge to his advantage. According to Caesar's commentary I de Bello Gallico, the British had fortified a ford by embedding sharpened wooden stakes, both along the banks and concealed underwater in the riverbed. These stakes were intended to impale Roman soldiers or horses attempting to wade across. It was a primitive but effective form of river defense designed to exploit the Romans' lack of familiarity with the terrain. Despite the unfamiliarity of the environment, Caesar was not blind to the trap. He relied on Gallic allies, local informants, and his own network of scouts to gather intelligence about the safest crossing points. This allowed him to identify the fortified ford, likely near modern-day Brentford or Kingston upon Thames, where the river was shallow enough to cross but still presented a formidable obstacle. When Caesar gave the order to cross, his infantry led the way, wading into the river with shields raised above their heads and swords in hand. The cavalry, positioned on the flanks and slightly downstream, protected the main body of troops from harassment by British charioteers. The stakes in the river were a hazard, but the discipline and coordination of the Roman soldiers allowed them to push through the current and maintain their formation. Cassivellaunus had likely expected confusion and chaos among the Romans, but what he witnessed was an orderly and relentless advance, even through the muddy waters and traps. According to Caesar, the Britons, taken aback by the determination of the Roman soldiers and unable to stop the crossing, broke ranks and retreated inland. The crossing was a turning point in the campaign. It shattered the illusion of Britain's natural defences and undermined Cassivellaunus's strategy of using the land itself as a shield.
Caesar's second invasion force was bigger and better prepared than the first. He brought 5 legions, not 2, 2,000 cavalry in a total of 800 ships, including traders as well as troop transporters, designed to sit higher in the water to be able to land closer to the shore in shallower water. This time the Britons did not oppose the landing, possibly afraid of the size of the Roman forces. After landing, Caesar immediately marched inland 19 kilometres and met British forces at the River Stour. He beat off the British, but didn't pursue them any further because it was late in the day and he was unfamiliar with the territory. The next day he received news of more storms and massive damage to his ships. He returned to the beach and began to repair his ships, taking 10 days to complete the work. Caesar's 10-day delay helped the British immensely. Leaving their differences aside between neighbouring tribes, they elected Cassivellaunus supreme commander of all British forces. He was a warlord from north of the Thames and assembled a large allied army under his command and awaited Caesar near the crossing of the River Stour.
As we conclude our journey into Caesar's invasion of Britain, we're left with a deeper understanding of a bold but brief encounter, one that marked the beginning of Rome's long interest in the island. Though Caesar's campaigns did not result in lasting conquest, they opened the door to future invasions and reshaped how Britain was viewed in the Roman world. Through strategy, diplomacy, and spectacle, Caesar's expeditions left a legacy far greater than the battles themselves. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring the past that still shapes our present. This is Time Stream. See you next time.